All right, I'm so excited for this episode. We're doing our year in review. I think I did this last year on the podcast as well, but I'm really excited to talk about what do we do, what do I do, what do we do as a team to really recap the last year. So recap 2024 and get ready for 2025. So I'm going to be sharing with you some of the things that, I think about, some of the things that we think about between me and my team member, as well as some different resources that we use for the planning. And I know that when I shared this out on my social media that I was going to be doing an episode on this, I had some requests and comments asking me, to share a couple of the ways that I work with my assistant to help me do the planning. So I'm going to be covering a couple of these things. I've got my coffee here. If you're watching the video, I've got my cute little Christmas tree coffee mug with me, and I also have with me my notebooks. I feel like, what is that kid show, that handy dandy notebook? Is that Blue's Clues? I have my notebooks with me that I'm going to be talking about. So first of all, for the last couple of years, I've really followed almost the same process and kind of added and tweaked a few things to really think about the year before and plan for the year ahead. So a couple of key things that I like to do that I was doing on my own before I had an assistant was thinking about the last year and thinking about all the wins, right? So I will say that sometimes our brains naturally go to what are all the things that didn't go the way that I want. And I would say especially 2024. I mean, if you've been around my, podcast or me for a while, 2024 was a rough year personally with a lot of things that happened, especially the tail end of the year. But also it was a tough year in business for a lot of people. There was a lot of, ambiguity this year. Business was weird this year for a lot of people, a lot of different industries, in terms of the speed at which people were saying yes to do business with you, people putting a pause on doing business from an organizational standpoint, also small businesses as well. So it was a tough year in business for a lot of people. And I know when I talk to people that the tendency can be for us to start to think about all the things that didn't go well. But I'm going to challenge you to first start with, what are all the things that went really well this year? So of course, when we do our reflection, we look back and we think about what were the wins that we had this year. And I'm even going to share some of those with you. For me, 2024 was a huge growth year in the sense of my own kind of CEO mindset, my own leadership growth. I joined a really high level mastermind. So November of 2023, I attended a conference for a group that had been recommended to me before that really helps to elevate you as a CEO, and it's really focused on helping you work with organizations and leveling yourself up as a business owner. And from that conference, I signed on for their, a high level mastermind. It was the biggest investment I had made, and I'm not new to making investments in my business. I've always been part of having coaches. I practice what I preach. So I've always had a coach, a business coach or a mindset coach. I've been a part of a program, but this one was intense. It brought all of it together. I had a business strategist. I had a mastermind group. We had 3 plus the conference, so really 4 in-person events, and it was really pushing me to think more like a CEO. So when I think about this year, growth was a huge part of my year in terms of getting me to think about my business differently, my leadership differently, my offerings differently. And so sometimes though, when you're in that growth phase, you're not sometimes you have to have that time to grow. So I went in with this sort of unrealistic expectation that I was going to be able to take everything they taught me, and by March or April, spring of that year, have achieved all these things. And I had to go back and realize I really needed to build the foundational skills and learn those things. And it is giving me the momentum for next year. So that was one of the wins that I had, is a huge growth year. It also was a year of a lot of lessons, of learning for me what we need to not do anymore, which is actually another part of what I'll talk about, but a lot of lessons for me of how can I be even more strategic with my time? How can I simplify and do what really works? So we're actually going to be having someone on the podcast. I have to see when she's coming on. We have someone who does human design. If you've never heard of human design, I'm still kind of new to it, but she talks about human design, and I know this tiny bit much about it, but I'm what they call a manifesting generator, which is where you always have a lot of different ideas. And so for the last 5 years of my business, I've loved creating programs and implementing new programs, and I could do this and I could do that's the cool thing about entrepreneurship, is it feels like the opportunities are endless. And at the same time, that can also be overwhelming when you're going from thing to thing. And so I have some really solid systems and programs that I already run. So I have my Speaker Space Academy that has proven success in helping other small business owners and entrepreneurs grow their skills as a speaker and grow their business with speaking. I also have my own talks that I do, my keynote events and my workshops that have shown to have results and get good comments and reviews from people time and time again. I also have my Confident Leader Academy, which is my signature leadership program that was one of the first programs I created, which is for corporate leaders, for leadership organizations to bring their leaders together in this group cohort experience with one-on-one coaching and group coaching and resources and a training portal to help elevate your skills as a leader. So I have all of these things already built. And so for me, one of the things that I realized for this year was to lean in moving into next year is to really lean into what I already know works and to simplify and spend more time really focusing on those things before adding in other things. And so that was another win for me. So it was, a big year of learning, a big year of lessons. Another big win this year was just the podcast and having the podcast for the last year. We had some amazing speaking events that I was able to speak at this year, some great keynote events, started working with some new organizations from leadership coaching and providing other resources, as well as also, trying out new things. So we started hosting what we call executive forums, which is where we bring together executives within all different industries together just about every month to talk about key leadership topics. And that has created a really cool space for not only me to talk to leaders, but also for leaders to talk to each other about what's working in their industry. So that's another thing that we implemented this year. And let's see. So those are some of the wins. Like, I'm not going to go through I'm not going to go through the whole list, but that's one of the things we did is really think about what were some of the big wins that we had this year. We also then obviously on the flip side talk about what are some of the lessons from this year, the things that didn't really go that well. So of course, in typical Julie, fashion and transparency, I want to share some of those things as well. So I would say one of those things is being organized and decisive. So I can sometimes struggle with being decisive on things that if you know me personally, you're like, wait, you what? So, I can struggle with being indecisive. So we actually took through my mastermind, we took a few different assessments, and one of those was the Kolbe, which I'm still kind of learning about, but I was a very high fact finder, which now knowing that doesn't surprise me about myself, but I need a lot of information and do a lot of research and digging before I can make a decision. And in some regards, that can be really beneficial. And sometimes it can't, right? It could hold me back from doing things. And so that was one of the things that I want to kind of leave behind in 2024 is some of that indecision. And in 2025, taking a little bit more calculated but quicker action, what they kind of call a quick start, and doing more of those things. The other thing that I kind of want to leave behind in 2024 is, and also think about for going into 2025 is just how I utilize my time, which goes hand in hand with what I said before about if we simplify what we're focused on, then we can really hone in and master the things that we already know are working and working well. And so for us, it's one of the things that I had identified that I'm going to leave behind in 2024 is kind of this willy-nilly schedule. So I'm another assessment that I took, I have all these ones that helps me to better understand myself and how I work, is called Motivational Maps. And my highest motivator is spirit, meaning I'm driven by this idea for freedom, which makes sense given that pull into what I do now. At the same time, it's this understanding of and what my mindset coach has helped me to think about is how by creating a tighter schedule and by creating more systems in my business, does it allow me to have more freedom? And that question itself was ooh, I have to sit with that. So that's another thing we're thinking about and leaving behind in 2024. The other thing I would really love to leave behind in 2024 is health things and random life things, right? So if you've been following, I released a whole episode on update on the melanoma and my surgery, and I'm happy to say that I'm healing really well. If you're watching the video, a lot of people have said you can't even see it that well. So we would love to leave that behind, but then again, we don't have total control of what happens to us, just how we take what happens to us and move forward. So that's one of the things that we do from reflecting on the year? What were the wins? What were the things we want to leave behind? And then of course we look at the numbers as well. So if you are in corporate and you're a corporate leader and you're kind of doing this for yourself, for you, your numbers might look like, how did you use your budget within your team, or how did it meet the organization's strategic goals? If you're a small business owner or entrepreneur, looking at your numbers to go, what was my revenue goal? What were my expenses that I had this year? And then also something that we're working on for 2025 is better knowing our own numbers in terms of outreach and all of that. So looking at, for us, we looked at like how many events did I speak at? How many clients did I have in my different programs? What methods worked and what didn't work? So for us, one of the things I tried in 2024 that I would say didn't fail, it just was something that we decided wasn't where I wanted to spend my time, is I started a membership, and we did it for about 6 months, and we realized like this is something I would love to do, but not at this state with everything else going on. And so we kind of retired that membership, but we just looked at how were we getting clients into our business and what was working and what's not working. We also then looked at for 2024 how Katie and I work together. So Katie's my executive assistant, and we looked at, what did she take ownership over? What are some things that really worked well? What does she need me to do differently? What did she like that how I did things this year? What does she not want me to do? So we had that whole conversation. And then looking into 2025. So that's kind of our 2024 year in review. As we looked at our goals that we had set the year before, we looked at numbers, we looked at wins, we looked at challenges. What do we kind of want to leave behind? And then we kind of transition into now, what do we want to take with us into 2025? So in that whole thing, we of course set goals. So when it comes to setting the goals, of course I set revenue amount. So I set kind of my big, hairy, scary goal, as I like to call it, and then kind of like a realistic, maybe more realistic quote unquote goal. So we set revenue goals. The other thing that we did this year that I'm really excited about is we figured out exactly what I would need to do to hit that revenue goal. So this can take something that seems really intangible and make it feel like when we walked through it, I was like, wow, that feels so realistic. So again, how could we do this is because I decided moving into next year to stick to the programs and the things that I already have, unless of course we'll re-examine every quarter like we always do and say, okay, do we need to switch something? But ultimately, if we stick to what we know works and what I want to focus on next year, we figured out how many keynote speaking events do I want? How many corporate contracts do I want? We figured out for my Speaker Space Academy, which is my signature 6-month speakers program, we figured out we're having 2 launches. How many people would we need and want in each cohort? We also figured out with my leadership cohort and program, how many people would we want into there? And so figured out, and that's now giving us something to march towards. Also, one of the things that we set for 2025 was, so the programs we want to launch, how many things I want to speak at, our numbers, but also how we want to work together. So our process. So for me, it's figuring out, podcasts do I want to be on? How many guests do I want to have on? Coming up with more of a schedule. Like a pivot we've made is, deciding that we're going to host some batch recording days where I'm going to have solo and guest recording that we're batching so that I have more things that are set and I already have them versus like, oh, we need to record an episode. We also have this goal of wanting to just tighten up my schedule even more, like really sticking to what I call CEO days where I don't have meetings. So Mondays is where Katie and I meet as a team, usually in person because I'm so lucky that she's local to me, sometimes virtual if need be. Like this week, my son was home from school with some earaches and things, so we could meet virtually, but setting those days and then my ideal working hours, how many meetings I want to have. And then Fridays, typically, I try not to have meetings either, but that can kind of flex as well. So setting that schedule. Let's see, other things that we really identified for 2025 is we talked about what are some of the, a big goal and thing that we're working on currently is elevating just the overall firm that I have and bringing on other team members, other faculty members. And so we're going to be onboarding more people to do coaching, to do training, facilitation, all of that. So that's a big goal for us. And we actually even started to kind of break down timelines. Like, so for me, it was like, hey, Q1, I really want to be focused on this. By the end of Q1, I want this done. And so I will just say, like, talking through all of this, we did this planning session right at the end of November. And so I would say, for you, if you're listening to this episode here in December when it's getting released, you still have time to do this. Maybe you're someone who likes to do it at the start of January, but I just know at the end of that session with her and I felt not only re-energized after what was, a tough year and a tough couple months. I felt re-energized. I felt excited, but I also just felt like I had such a plan of going into next year and really thinking about what were the things that we needed to focus on. The other thing that we did is because we started hosting these executive forums, all of them are on the calendar for the entire year, so we know when they're happening. And we also decided to start hosting something similar for speakers, so kind of like a speakers forum. I believe we landed on speaker series, and so we got those on the calendar. So all of that is there. We started to block out what my schedule is going to look like next year as well. And then also we set like a big vision. So we do like the tactical things, like all the things I just talked about, but then we also talk about the vision, like how do I want to feel in 2025? And with that, we set my word. So every single year, and I've done episodes on this on the podcast. I'll do it at the start of January about my word of the year, but I pick a word of the year. And for me, when I pick up a word of the year, it's not just picking it and like setting it and forgetting it. I usually write it down as I'm journaling, and I really try and think about how am I doing that. So my word of 2024 was embody. Now, I had to make a pivot because when I picked embody, it was this idea of like, oh, I'm embodying the person I'm talking about now, who has this like really clean cut business and everything's going the way I want it. And we can't control all of that. Life had other plans in 2024. And so I actually switched my word partway through the year to surrender. And I don't know if I necessarily embodied that, but it was just this idea of sometimes we have to surrender to just like what is, to be able to release some of the pressure on us to make things happen when there's just another plan for you. My word of 2025 that I've so far selected, I haven't solidified, but is peace. It's this idea of whatever I'm doing personally or professionally, it's got to go through the lens of, is this bringing me more peace? And if it's not, it's got to go. And that's largely coming, again, just driven from if I want to be able to show up as the CEO and the entrepreneur and the wife and the mom that I want to be, I need to have more of that peace. I work on reducing stress, work on just doing things that bring more peace so that I can even better show up in all parts of my life. So we pick that word and then kind of set, how do I want to feel in 2025? So those are all kind of logistics. In terms of like, what do we use for planning? Literally, we keep it really simple. I have a good old notebook that I like jot ideas down. I've talked about this planner before, but after we do the planning, I put it into my day designer. So I'll talk about this in just a minute. But just going to the question that someone asked me to address on the podcast was around, how do I do this with my assistant? How do I do the planning? Like, how much do I include her in it? What does she do versus what do I do? I'm going to put this with the caveat that I am so sing her praises all the time. And people even are like, hey, does she have any hours available? No, she doesn't. She's full-time with me, also supports my husband's business, so you cannot have her. But she's outstanding. And so I will say, the more we've worked together, the more, and she's just someone that's a go-getter and really takes the initiative. So how we have worked out the last 2 years is she actually comes to that meeting for us to do the year-end review. She comes prepared, having pulled out what we had talked about the year before, like, hey, here's what you said you wanted to do in 2024. And then we walk through together, like, did I do it? Did I not do it? She comes already with things that she thought were wins for the year, which always feels really good. And she also comes with, hey, these are things that didn't go so well this year. Maybe from like, hey, I need you to get me podcast episodes sooner, or I'd really like different communication here. So she comes prepared with those. And then when we're sitting in the session, and doing the planning, she kind of has a spreadsheet and is taking notes. She kind of lets me just stay in my zone of genius, which is just like the visionary and thinking about how I want the year to go. So I can just kind of ramble and talk things out, and she's taking notes as we're doing that. So for us, we kind of do like a little bit of an offsite, and we try and spend, it takes us almost a whole day to do all of this. And we get coffee or go to a coffee shop or in my office. The other thing she does is she usually picks up calendars for me so that as we plan launch dates, she can write those in the calendar. So I'll kind of just say, hey, this is my revenue goal for next year. This is how I want to meet it. These are some things I want to focus on next year. And she'll take notes on all of this for me. And again, she'll come with ideas, which is so cool. So she'll take notes on all of that. And then we'll plan out the launches. So for example, for launching my Speaker Space Academy, we plan out, okay, I want it launched on this date, and then that means that we have to start and we kind of work backwards. We have to start enrolling people on this date, which means we have to start marketing on this date, which means we want to do our speakers boot camp on this date. We map all of that out. She jots it down, and then so we get done with our planning day. We've got our whole plan. Then she takes that, she writes it all on the calendar for me. She adds it to my calendar, to my Google Calendar, so that we have it all on there. So again, I'm very lucky, but that was just a question that someone had asked, is how much do I involve her? I would say she's really involved. Like, she does know pretty much all the ins and outs of my business. And transparently, that was really tough for me initially, because I was kind of this like, keep it close to the chest. Like, maybe she doesn't need to know what my revenue goal is, or maybe I don't want to share with her that I didn't do something well, right? But the more that we've built kind of trust, she's really a partner in my business. And so for you, I would say, again, if you're someone who works in an organization, you might work with your assistant a little bit differently, but lean on them and their strengths, because our strength of hers, and one of the things she says to me is like, Julie, next year it would be great if you could be more decisive on things. So for me, I love ideas and all of this, but she's really good at helping me like, okay, now we need to decide. So if you have an assistant or team members, think about what are their strengths that you could be utilizing. What are your strengths? What are their strengths that you could be utilizing, that they bring to the table, and actually use them, right? Because she loves the organizing piece. She loves writing the things on my calendar and all of that. She loves doing all of that. And so she is able to do all that for me. And again, if you're an entrepreneur, small business owner, if you have an assistant, think of what their strengths are or what you could leverage for them. But these are some ideas for you to think about what maybe they could be doing. Maybe you don't share all this with them, but maybe at least you could plan all of this stuff out and they could be putting on your calendar and all of that. So that is, in a nutshell, I know it's a lot, but that's pretty much a whole day of our time that we do. And it was so worth taking the time to do that, because then I can look back and go, and now we have kind of this working thing, and we'll revisit it every quarter. We do a quarterly planning session, and we'll revisit if we're meeting what we want to be meeting, if we need to be making any changes, if any dates change, and we'll reassess from there. So hopefully that's helpful for you to not only share what we do, but also just for me to transparently share some of like the wins and lessons instead of failures, the lessons that we've had and what we're focusing on. And so again, in a nutshell, this 2024, we look at what were the wins, what were the lessons, what do we want to leave behind this year, how did we feel during the year, what do we want to bring with us into 2025, and then 2025 kind of set the whole thing. What do we want to feel like, but also what do we want to do and accomplish in 2025? And then get it all on the calendar. The other thing I'll say that we're working on doing too is just like with the calendar, making sure everything's on there. When I'm traveling, when vacations are, so that we feel like we're set up for success. So hopefully this helps you get excited about whatever version of this. You want to do a small scale version, if you do something even bigger than that. But I just wanted to share what we do, and also just reflect on what went. I'm super excited for 2025. We've got some really exciting things with what we're focused on, and just all the things that we can learn from this year. And I'm excited for health and happiness, and let's say health, wealth, and happiness in 2025. So thank you all so much for listening. Of course, I would absolutely love if you take time to leave a rating or review on the podcast. It's super helpful. I know I like to drop this in just as a reminder for you to take a few minutes and send me a message. What was helpful for you about what I shared here? What maybe are you implementing in your planning for the next year? And of course, if you want to share this out and tag me and let me know what was helpful for you. Happy 2025 planning.